if you're following along in real time, I believe it's 4 more days to the AP Gov Exam. All right, at this point, you best know all your documents, you best know all your Supreme Court cases, and keep reviewing the content in the units, right? Practice questions, practice your FRQs. Please make sure you know to include a because statement / thesis with your argument essay. I saw so many in the practice exams that forgot that part, and that'll just make you cry. It makes me cry just thinking about it. So, going over the practice exams, I just want to go over some of the content that it looked like some of you guys had trouble with. You're never going to have the exact same multiple choice questions year to year. Content will always somewhat overlap, right? So if you know this, good. If you don't know this, but go through your units and look at like vocabulary lists out there and see like, oh, which ones don't I know? Do I not know what franking privilege means? All right, so let's go and figure that out. All right, so let's eat yogurt and go over this. First question you had was on concurrent powers, right? So much, like basically everything in this course is about how does the Constitution work to preserve our form of government, right? So how do concurrent powers fit into that? Concurrent means something that's existing or happening at the same time. So if you're a baseball fan, you'll see that like as the Mets play the Phillies concurrently, you'll see scores because there's other games going on concurrently, lots of games happening at the same time. All right, so think of what powers do both the national and the state governments have. They both have the power of taxation. Aren't we lucky? They both have law enforcement. So whether it's local governments that have those concurrent powers, like your town police or your county sheriffs, your state police, right? Don't want to get pulled over by them. And then you'll have federal too, whether it's the ATF or the FBI. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, pork barrel legislation threw some people off. Know about budgeting, right? Congress has the power of the purse. Know what like an earmark is. All right, pork barrel legislation. Just think of a farmer feeding a pig, or a senator, or a congressperson feeding a pig, right? Even though they're voting on something else. So even though they might have a vote on aid for something, they might be slipping in aid to their local farm. What's in it for their constituents to get them to vote for the bill? All right. So here's an example of something that was in the news last week. What state was this in? Illinois or something. I wish there was a pork barrel spending thing for me to get $500,000. That'd be great. All right. Bully pulpit, right? Remember, you want to know what powers does everyone have in the government? And even outside the government, what can people do? What can the media do, right? What can interest groups do? So if it says, like the Supreme Court shut something down or Congress tried to pass a law, what can all the other groups, agencies do? What's one thing that the president can do? The president has the power of the bully pulpit. You see this from a recent CNN article. Notice I'm trying to pull all different diverse news here. This term made popular by Teddy Roosevelt. See what he's doing? He's speaking to all these people, right? He has an agenda. He's speaking to them so that they can pressure their congressmen and women to vote or to pass a certain law or something like that. So just think of like the bullhorn, right? That's a good way to remember it. Maybe a bull, but I think the bullhorn. Incorporation. You want to make sure you understand incorporation. All right? Our government, and think of our Bill of Rights and our Constitution. Those rights and liberties cannot be violated by the federal government. But they may have been violated by state or local governments. And the 14th Amendment is part of this incorporation thing that said that those rights and liberties had to also be protected by your state and local governments. All right. Where do we see this in our SCOTUS cases? We see it with Gideon Wainwright, the right to an attorney. The state of Florida now had to adhere to, not just the federal government. And McDonald v. Chicago, right? The Chicago cannot violate someone's Second Amendment rights, right? So if you have to think of like McDonald's is a corporation, right? McDonald was incorporated, right? The Second Amendment, whatever you need to do to remember that. Know your amendments. Okay, there's going to be questions on just knowing your amendments. Now, I said today there's some amendments you almost never see a question on, like the 11th Amendment or the Third Amendment. But if I say that this year, for some random reason, there'll be a question about quartering, right, which has not been an issue in a very long time. But know your amendments. There's going to probably be a voting one, right, whether it's the 24th in poll taxes, the 26th and 18th, the 15th, the 19th. Of course, there's going to be a question on at least one of the Reconstruction Amendments. You need to know the 14th Amendment in equal protection and due process, right? There could be a political one like presidential term limits. That's easy to remember. It's like 2 terms, whatever. Direct election of senators, 17 senator. That always seems to be remembered, right? Know some history, right? This doesn't mean, oh, great, I need to go find a U.S. history textbook and read it for the exam. Don't do that at this part. But key acts of legislation, right? You should know. Shays Rebellion, right? You should know Shays Rebellion, how it made the Articles of Confederation look weak because Washington did not have, well, really, no one had the power to enforce it. Washington wasn't even president yet, right? Yeah, but come terms for the Whiskey Rebellion, he could enforce it, but there was no central government that could enforce things under Shays, right? Which is why Washington, as a citizen, knew that there needed to be change. So, know the weaknesses of the articles. Of course, I like to say know its strengths, but they're not going to ask you about that either. And then know how the Constitution addressed it, and know how each is different, right? There's one branch in the Articles, 3 branches in the Constitution, a unicameral Congress in the Articles, a bicameral Congress in the Constitution. But no basic history. Know that like there was a period of civil rights unjusts. Know that the Civil War Reconstruction led to the Reconstruction Amendments. Know what Shays Rebellion was. All right. Types of grants. The 2 most basic ones are block grants, which are very general, like here's this money, you have a lot of leeway in how you spend it. Categorical grants are more specific. This is the category you have to spend it on, right? I just think if you had a block, a city block, and you were given money to use on that block, think of all the different ways you could use it. You could improve the sidewalks. You could build a park. You could fix signs, right? You could help someone open a deli. But if you had a categorical grants, it might just say, this money is just to fix the sidewalks. Right? Okay. Party platforms. I keep wanting to eat, but I have to talk. This is difficult. Know the basic party platforms. Now, I was discussing in class today that over time, these change a little bit. The views on defense and defense spending, who's war hawks and who's not, it's sort of changing a little bit. It's changed a little bit the past few years. But generally speaking, there's big, broad themes with this. Like I said, look, this is from 2012, right? This has changed a little bit. You'll find some Republicans now who are supportive of gay marriage that you probably wouldn't have seen in 2012, right? 2012, you probably would have seen more Republicans support Ukraine spending, for example, than you do now. But generally speaking, these are the party platforms. Good chance there's an FRQ where it will ask you just like to understand the party platforms and how it's addressed. Wouldn't hurt to know some third party either. I would say Libertarian Party and the Green Party. Libertarian even more than Green Party. You know where it overlaps a little bit. If you're like, I forget, that should be in your notes, right? No one did their Madison project who did it in front of the class, made their Madison's friend a libertarian. And usually there's always one person, so I could use that as an example. So know the basic platforms of those. Know polls. You guys are STEM kids, so you should know polls. Know how sampling works, right? So my idea that you guys will do well is based on the students who took the practice exam. Is that random sampling? Or do you think the kids who tried to who were there are people that would have done who study more anyway. Not true. I know some of you guys were busy and stuff and took other tests and took the SATs. I'm not judging you, but just think like, is that a random sample, right, or not? Also, know the different types of polls. An exit poll, like literally, someone's exiting the polls, and the pollsters are asking them who they voted for. Tracking, you're tracking over time. How did people's change? Benchmark, think baseline, like just going into something, this is how people feel. But then we may have a tracking poll to see if that's changed, right? So here's an example. I didn't cite which one this was from, and I forget. I have to check my notes. But from a few months ago, how different groups voted on Super Tuesday primary according to the exit polls. So according to the people that saw how they voted just as they were out. Remember, they have to be so many feet from the polling place, of course. And this is an example. So if there is a qualitative FRQ or even a multiple choice question, if you see that change in time in days and weeks and months and years, it's probably a tracking poll, right? Because you see how at different times, like this is on the Obamacare Act. At some points, they thought that I'm looking for a word that's eluding me, but it was more in favor, and then it went down a little bit and sort of plateaued again. Opposite, right? For thinking it was unfavorable. And just with know your history, know your legislation, right? Know key legislations. Know the Civil Rights Act. Know the Voting Rights Act. Know Title IX. Some of the other ones you don't see as much, but still might be questions on. The Motor Voter Act. What about the American Disabilities Act? I mean, you sort of know what that's about, right? It's just by listening to the name, right? And know that that's reflecting what was going on, the civil rights movement at the time. Vietnam protests, right? We see that with like Tinker v. Des Moines, New York Times versus U.S. You want to know basic legislation and history as it deals with the generations that you should know, right? Like, so people that lived through 9/11 versus people that lived through World War II, all those sorts of things. Know that. Types of voting, we just did this with Unit 5, but a few people had this wrong, but we didn't get there yet. So now you probably would have got it right. Perspective, you're thinking ahead. Retrospective, you're looking back. Rational, like you're using reasoning. Party line is, I'm a Republican, so I'm just going to vote Republicans, or I'm Democrat, so I'm just going to vote Democrat. So this is from CBS News. This was very recently. It said, a poll found that voters remembered Trump's economy as good, boosting Trump to national lead over Biden. So if people are looking back and they're going, oh, the economy was good back then they're using retrospective voting, if that's why they choose them. If they go, the past 4 years with Biden were good, that would be retrospective, right? If they're going, oh, this is what we think they'll do in the future, that's perspective. All right. And type of democracies, this was not on that practice test, but it's something that's often on a test. So because it was something from the very beginning of the year, I wanted to remind you, don't forget about it. Review what a participatory democracy is, a pluralist democracy, an elitist democracy, all right? Word to the wise, we're a little bit of all three, right? But if this was an FRQ, like what type is the best and why, right? Well, you could probably, cite some of the Federalist Papers and all sorts of things. But here's an example. So Kim Kardashian being in the White House last week to talk with the vice president about reforming the criminal justice system. That's a form of elitist democracy. She's someone with money and power, and she's using that to make change. Oh, so many things. You're making your door. Oops. Oh, thank you. Tonight, thank you so much. This was a dramatic pause to make you think about Kim Kardashian in the White House. So if Hamilton was a fan of elitist democracy, it's probably not the kind he was thinking of. Hey. All right. Any questions, let me know. Next week.